Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I've made the offer to several coming in. If you guessed the title of the lesson, we could shut down and go home early. So far, I haven't heard it. So you're stuck with me for 45 minutes. And James is thinking, I have to sit and listen to instruction all day long, every day. Maybe I'll offer some opportunity for you to speak, James. That'd be good. Let's begin with a word of thanks for the day. We'll get our study going. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for the newness of this day, that your mercies and compassions are renewed from day to day. And as we are bogged down from time to time with the struggles and obstacles of life, may we look into the Word, may we look into the world and see evidence of you, and we likewise can be renewed by those provisions you give us, by your blessings, by your ongoing love and care and provision for us. Thank you for this opportunity on a Lord's Day that we can come together peaceably for a time set aside to open up the Scriptures and study from them. And may we garner information and knowledge and then ask you for wisdom to understand these things, to apply them and use them as we go about our lives from day to day, serving you. In Christ's name, amen. All right, let's advance a slide and see if this will give us any help. Got it now? There's been a recent popularity, people wanting to track ancestry. So you've got your Ancestry.com and your 23andMe's, different versions, different companies offering. You can order a DNA kit, right? Send in your sample and wait a few days or weeks and they're going to send you back some information. Why do people do this? Why are some people interested in this? What are they looking for? I'm sorry? Where'd you come from? Yeah, where did I come from or my family? Maybe some things related to that would be things about relations, trying to make connections.
You could be looking for medical history, if you knew who all was in your family tree.
Some histories, some things that would come from that. On the one hand, there might be caution, right? Careful what you ask for, what you might find out. I may not want to know that I'm kin to certain people or something, but usually, yeah, they're looking for positive things out of these types of efforts. So we kind of think about that. Then I want to tell you, in our growing up, Mom and Dad had quite a collection of 45 records when we were little. A lot of them, were big people, old people music that I didn't relate to, weren't of interest to me. But they had several records that were from, I guess you would call them like comedians, but in song. One of those was a fellow named Johnny Stanley, and one of his songs in particular was a song entitled, and we had the record, It's in the Book. And so this fellow starts off as if, the tone is as if a preacher coming, I've got a message for you, a very sad message. Little Bo Peep has lost her sheep. And he's just kind of going to do, it's a parody somewhat of that story, but as he doesn't remember all the details exactly and he's making it up or just fitting it in, he would come back to this line, it's in the book, as an assurance. Or I promise you, that's how it is. You could go look it up, it's there, it's in the book. Well, if you were to go look up that story or that book, you would find he wasn't correct at all on a number of items. But it was funny, hilarious, and I loved that as a kid. But I kind of want to hold on to that thought also about it's in the book, that there is a place, as he referenced, you could go and look up or check the facts, as it were. I want to ask you this morning to turn in your Bibles, find 1 Chronicles. I'll give you a hint. It comes right after 1st and 2nd Kings. And then 1st, 2nd Chronicles would follow after that. maybe some of the least exciting reading in the Bible would be to go to 1 Chronicles 1 and start reading like the first 9 chapters there. Because once you find that and just kind of glance at it, what do you see there? Lineage. This guy had 3 sons, and their names were A, B, and C. And son A had 4 sons, and their names were blah, 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 blah. And then the next guy had these, and then you pick up from there and go on to the next generation. And so just page after page, right? List after. Is that going to be pretty exciting? You know, just, man, that's really telling me a story or something. No, and that's not the purpose of it at all. But that's what's found in here. A section with a lot of lists. Just that word's going to turn some people off, and I would be among them. A lot of genealogy. Some people, as we said, get excited about that and want to go back and dig and make those connections and all that. I've got about a 3% interest in that, but you're going to lose me pretty quickly. You know, just charts of who had who and family trees and all that. That's not really my thing, but we find a lot of that here. Might think of it as just a registry of names, registry of families in some cases, but there's other things that are found through these sections. So some of the divisions, if maybe you've got headings that your Bible puts in or chapter divisions or whatever, there are descendants of the patriarchal age, starting in chapter 1, verse 1. It just starts Adam, Sheth, Enoch, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared. Just, here we go, bam, bam, bam. And it's going to go all the way, starting with Adam, and just go all the way down to the time of King David. Okay. Chapter 1, verse 43, there's a section start. Here's the kings of Edom listed. Wonder why we need to know that. Why are they included in here? Chapter 2, verse 1, descendants of Israel, or Jacob, as his name was. Starting with Jacob or Israel, the sons of him, and we know, Israel had 12 sons. Well, here they are listed, and then each one of those had some sons, and he had some sons, and he had, just going from there, from Israel again, all the way down to David. Chapter 6, here's the family of Levi. He had some sons. They're going to be responsible for different things, right? In the tabernacle or later the temple, their orders of the Levites. That's all kind of being established or reminded here of how it was established, when it was established, and what that order was about. Chapter 9, verse 1, here's the families who returned from Babylon. So we've got all these, and there are others. This is just some of the ones that are found in this book. A lot of lists, a lot of names, a lot of stuff in there. Well, let me back up. Let me suggest if we could do it this way, maybe. All right. That these 2 books, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, do have a particular purpose. They weren't written directly to us, although we still have them, but written for the Jews who, as a nation, have been off in exile, right? Carried off in captivity, number of years there. So people would have died and married and things changed and what have you. While they were gone, other people have moved into the land, and all that. But now they're coming home, returning home from exile. This book points in particular a number of times throughout it, out of all these lists and just people's names and this, blah, blah, blah stuff. But if you keep reading or read carefully, there's purpose for these things. That it points to the covenant of God with His chosen people. Who were the chosen people of God? Israel? Or we just guess that? Do we know that? Where would you go? Does a passage come to mind? You might hold your finger here and just quickly glance at Deuteronomy chapter 5. You may be in discussion with someone someday, talking something about the 10 Commandments or the Old Testament law or something along those lines. We need to keep that, and we've got to still follow that. You've He stated very clearly why He gave those laws, those commandments, and the others, through Moses and all that. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 5, start at verse 1. Moses called all Israel and says, "Hear, O Israel, the statutes and judgments that I speak in your ears this day. You may learn them, keep them, and do them." But our point right here is in verse 2. The Lord our God made a covenant with us. Who is Moses talking to? All Israel. God made a covenant with us in Horeb. That you could go back to, Exodus 20, the first recording, the giving of that law. But Moses just reminding them, God made a covenant with us. That's who these laws and commandments and all apply to. And there was a purpose for them. And now he's reminded them, you need to hear them, keep them, do these things and all that. So from that time, through their history, there were times they didn't keep God's law, right? To such an extent, it got so bad, He sent them off into captivity. They have come back now, the remnant, coming back into the land. And so here's these two books, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Because you can imagine being carried off into captivity, a lot of your history, a lot of stuff about origins, where do we come from? Who owns what? Are we connected or not? Do I know those people? Are we in the same tribe? All these kind of things. Lost, destroyed, burnt, whatever. So they're coming back and these things are just kind of being recreated for them. But along with that is a message throughout both of these books about God's covenant. And the exhortation to Israel time and time again is, be faithful to that covenant. God made a covenant. What's the idea of a covenant? It means you're making an agreement, right, between two parties. Well, God's doing His part. We haven't done ours. And so it's time to change that. They're going to be told throughout these books, be faithful to the covenant. All right, anybody got it yet? In spite of the lists, the genealogies, what I, facetiously would say, maybe some dry reading, there are people of note throughout these lists. We're given tidbits of history. And so this morning I want to take a few minutes that we have in this class. No, we're not studying 1 Peter, if you didn't catch on to that by now. Kind of connect how Peter would tell them time and time again, you need to remember. That's in essence what these books are going to do for the Israelites. It's going to reestablish some things that had been set in place years earlier. Captivity messed up a lot of that. Here it's being reestablished, and you need to remember where you came from, that covenant with God, what He expects of you, how we failed before as a nation or as a people. So we got to get it right, moving forward. So some of those whose names are in the book, these are people that aren't going to be among you more popular. This morning we're not going to talk about David and Moses and Abraham, and Elijah and some of those well-known characters of the Bible, right? We're going to talk about people like Nimrod. So we're back in 1 Chronicles chapter 1. People of note. And so it's just a list, right? You got a name, and he had this son, he had this son, but every once in a while you stop and there's a line or two about these people. There's something of note about them out of these lists, out of these genealogies. And so chapter 1, as he's listing off the descendants of Ham, remember Noah had the sons there, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now of his sons, or of his descendants, chapter 1, verse 10, it's the sons of Cush that are being listed, verse 9. And then verse 10, Cush begat Nimrod. In other words, Cush is the father. He has a son named Nimrod. He began to be mighty upon the earth. Hold your finger there. Guess what? We can go back to Genesis chapter 10. And I hope after we've gone through this 45 minutes, you don't think that was the most boring class I've ever sat through. But pulling out these lists, I'm trying to get us to help see some connections, some reasons why these people are in there. We can go all the way back to Genesis chapter 10. Here are the descendants of Noah's son, right? Great flood. God has come to Noah, found him just and righteous. He and his family are the ones that are saved on the ark, come out the other side of the flood. You're going to start over again, repopulating the world, right? Out of these 8 people. Noah, his sons, and those wives there. And so here's a similar listing, but only through Noah, of his sons or his descendants. And you get down, verse 7, here's the sons of Cush again. That sounds familiar. Verse 8, Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. Man, it sounds exactly like what we just read in Chronicles. Well, it should be. Same author, God, behind both accounts. This one's going to give us a little bit extra detail or tidbit. Look at verse 9. He's a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, there was a saying, or somebody asked, which Nimrod? What guy are you talking about? Oh, as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. Not Nolan the hunter who likes to hunt, but he misses and he rarely sees deer, and even if there's dove flying everywhere, he's never limited out in his life. But like Dwayne, who with archery can, hit a target right, or used to, I don't know anymore. He was good. Several here are great with use of shotgun, can drop birds out of the air. I stand next to my son Tyler. He's dropping them right and left, and I'm missing twice as many as he hits. But this guy, reference Nimrod the mighty hunter, that's not it. That's not all. Verse 10, the beginning of his kingdom was. And now it starts to name some specific cities and areas and regions and places where he reigned. And out of that land, verse 11, here Asher goes forth and builds Nineveh. And we've heard of Nineveh, some things that are familiar. But what we can get out of this are some connections, right? Where did things come from? Where did they start? Well, Nimrod was a guy who was, what would you say, the precursor to Goliath? You talk about a hunter or a warrior, the original G.I. Joe, that's Nimrod. But not only in hunting, not only in battle, but he goes on and he's going to establish a kingdom. As it talks about, through him and his descendants, moving out in these places, conquering these lands, building cities. He's just mighty in a number of ways, this Nimrod. He accomplished great things on the earth. But what really matters? The Bible doesn't tell us, as far as I've found or can recall, was he faithful to God or not? We don't know. He was noted, had done some things that of men would stop and say, there goes Nimrod the mighty. Or you're talking about that guy who can whoop anybody and capture cities and set up nations and kingdoms. That guy was something. Back in 1 Chronicles, chapter 1. He began to be mighty upon the earth. Wonder how that'll help him in heaven. Again, we don't know. Maybe he was faithful. Maybe he did everything properly and right, serving God, and God blessed him in these ways. We don't know. But people of note, out of the list, first one jumps out of me, Nimrod. Second, how much do you know about Mizraim? Man, if you just asked me 2 days ago, we're walking down the street, I don't, who are you talking about? Sounds like a name in the Bible. Well, let's see here. Still in chapter 1. Still the descendants of Ham. Verse 11. Mizraim begat these guys. Ludum, Ananim, Lahabim, Naphtahim, and Pathrusim, and Casluhim, parentheses, of whom came the Philistines, into parentheses, and then his last son also. Now, how many in here have ever heard of the Philistines in Bible study? Oh, I saw 2 hands. We've got some work to do. Tell me some things. What are some stories about the Philistines where they were involved in the Bible? A thorn in Israel's flesh. I'm sorry? A constant trouble for David. Except for the one time, kind of odd, when David did what? He's going to slay Goliath. But isn't there a time when David's kind of in trouble back at home? What does he do? He goes and lives among the Philistines, the mortal enemy. And everybody's suspicious there, right? Telling their king, hey, you don't want this guy among us. And David feigns madness, right? Dribble off his beard and all that, scratching the wall. I think he's all right. Let him stay here. Who does that for a while? Was there a time in one of the judges, maybe in particular, had a lot of dealings with the Philistines? Another strong guy. Samson. So yeah.
They captured the ark.
Capturing the ark. Yeah, another great one. What happened as long as they had the ark?
They had a lot of trouble.
The problem, wasn't it? What was the main god of the Philistines? Started with a D.
Dagon.
Dagon. And every morning they come into their temple to worship. What did they find?
He fell over.
Boop! Dagon's face down on the ground as if bowing down to this Ark of the Covenant of God. Oh, that Ark of the Covenant of God. God had made a covenant with His people. They had kept copies of, right, the tables of stone, those 10 commandments that were to be a reminder of them, of this covenant. He's given us commands, how to live, what we need to know, how to do. We get away from it. Even our Ark of the Covenant, the Philistines have it, at their capital. And they do finally get it back. But we've got all these stories and things involving the Philistine. Now we have out of this listing, what was the origin of the Philistines? Well, Mizraim is the guy. It's through his descendants, one of his sons is the one in particular, that branch of his family established the Philistine nation. So there's a connection, right? You're going all the way back in time to near the beginnings of, when there are a few people and then they're multiplying and branching and established. But out of these, sons of Ham, one of those descendants is Mizraim. Through him come the Philistines and all these stories that we do know that there just was this nation of the Philistines, and man, they were always causing them trouble and a thorn in their side and all these stories we talked about. Here's where they came from, out of Mizraim, bitter enemies of the Israelites, a source of trouble from, as you stated, from the time of Samson through the reign of King David. Now we know something about them because of this listing, because of Mizraim, one of the descendants of Ham. Try another one. Can you tell me a lot about Peleg? I wouldn't. Still in chapter 1, down at verse 18 now. Now we're to the descendants of Shem. Different branch, right, of Noah's sons, going a little different way. But they would still be connected, and you can follow that if you want to trace it out here. But now, verse 18 and 19. Arphaxad begat Shelah, Shelah begat Eber, and unto Eber were born 2 sons. The name of the one was Peleg, because in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Most of these people, we just got a name and roll right on. Now we've got a pause. We've got a tidbit, a note, something. How do we name people, generally? You're going to have a child. How did you get what name am I going to use to name my kids? Maybe family, something looking back, or it's a name carried down? Sure. Look at what? Meaning of it? Maybe meaning of it? You want to... Okay. And that's what caused you and Joe to pick that.
Or you just like the way a certain name sounds.
It's got a ring to it. What's our last name? We want something that flows, or with a middle name or something. Mine's pretty exciting, I can tell you. A day or two before I was born, Mom had her sister-in-law and a niece there, and they got the phone book out and just started flipping through. Found Nolan. Go with it. It served me well. Okay. But the point is that many times, just as here, names were given for a very specific reason. Why was this guy named Peleg? Well, because there was a division in the earth. Again, this isn't the first time this is referenced. You can go back to Genesis 10. So in a few minutes we're going to talk about reasons why is this stuff in 1st and 2nd Chronicles? One of them on the list might be verification, reassurance. If it was written hundreds or thousands of years ago, this guy wrote it, and somebody comes along way down the line and says the same thing, you're talking about some accuracy there. Genesis chapter 10. 21, verse 21, to Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Japheth the elder, even to him were children born, and here's his children, verse 22. Verse 25, unto Eber were born 2 sons, the name of the one was Peleg, in his days was the earth divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. What do you mean the earth was divided? A couple of strong possibilities. You want to go back, not in this class, but I'll just throw them out if you want to go look into this. Some suggest, as you can find Strong's Concordance, other dictionaries, that literally the word for Peleg has reference to an earthquake, is one of the associated meanings. So maybe it was some catastrophical, physical event. The earth divided, where people lived, and suddenly there's a fissure in the ground and all that. And that would kind of get your attention. You're about to give birth. We're going to note that occasion. If you're still there at Genesis 10, maybe you know what happens the first 9 verses of Genesis 11. Anybody remember? There's a time when the earth was divided, not in a physical sense of ground splitting. Tower of Babel. Yeah. This is right in the time. We're talking about the descendants, and you're reading about descendants of Shem and all this. Chapter 11, these 9 verses are thrown in. Remember, all the people were united. We're going to build a tower that reaches up to heaven, and find God and all that. God comes down and causes the confusion. Was there division there? Yes. God divides and scatters now the nations, around the face of the earth. So some suggest that's the meaning or the origin, behind this guy's name. Either way, just pointing out the importance of names, that once upon a time, it seems more so way back there, and there still can be today. I've heard of people who are named for, after the city where their parents met or whatever, or, different reasons behind. More so I've just heard it sounds good or we like the flow of that. But there were a time that names were very significant and maybe either told a story or reminded them of a story, of an event, of, well, however old Peleg is, that was 30 years ago when he was born. That's when that thing happened, that division, whatever it was. Any comments or questions yet? You doing good on the test? All these famous characters of the Bible? How about Hadad? Don't know Hadad. Well, Hadad was a king. He had to be important. We had to know something about Hadad, right? Chapter 1, down at verse 43 is the section. These are the kings that reigned in the land of Edom. Note, before any king reigned over the children of Israel. Right? We know the story of the Israelites. They didn't have leadership. God sends them the judges. And then at one point, they end up asking God what? Give us kings like the nations around about us. One of those nations they're looking at or familiar with, the Edomites. Were the Edomites and the Israelites connected? Descendants of Esau, Edomites. So yeah, they're pretty well connected with the Israelites. Historically, family tree-wise. Edomites have an established kingdom. They've had a series of kings for years. In the midst of this, it's being written back to the Israelites, right, for their history and recreating all this and getting it set. Here's a list of kings of Edom. Okay, going to be thrown in there. But in particular about this one, verse 46 and 47. When Husham was dead, then Hadad, the son of Bedad, he's the next guy. What's noted about him? Which smote Midian in the field of Moab. He reigned in the stead of this Husham that's gone. And the name of his city, Avith. And when Hadad was dead, then here's the next guy, and it's just going to continue down this line of kings. A king in Edom, before Israel had any, was Hadad. And it's just listing, again, this guy, the next one, this guy, this one, But stop on this one. Have we heard the name Midian anywhere in the Old Testament? He was not one, but he fought the Midianites. Yeah, there you go. Were they just another little army of a couple hundred, that came along or something?
They
Big army. You go back in there, was it Judges, I think, chapter 6, where we're going to be introduced to Gideon. Before he comes up, it's just the Israelites, right? They've done evil again, not serving God. He hands them over into the hands of the Midianites. Years of service to the Midianites. And then it describes their army down about verse 5, 6, and 7. They're like grasshoppers. They're like sands on the seashore. Stars in the sky is the size of their army that has come up. And how are the Israelites going to end up defeating the Midianites? What's that, darling? 300 men. First they gather an army. We've still, I think originally like 32,000, but against the Midianites, we're nothing. God says, oh, that's too many. Because when I give you the victory, then you'll think, look what we did. Ask if anybody's scared and go home. Whew! Now we're down to 10,000, I think. God says, still too many. Take them, get the drink of water there, right? Whittles them down. 300. Gideon comes up with a plan. Well, here's another guy on another occasion. We don't know the details. But he also beat back the Midianites and defended his kingdom, his country, the Edomites. That's one of the things Hadad did. And I just find it interesting that one of this whole section there, a whole section of people who were not part of the chosen people of God, not of the Israelites, and yet noted. I think to me it's just one of those simple reminders in studying through the Bible that though the Old Testament we know tracks one particular nation, God's chosen people, the nation of Israel, to prepare for the coming of the Messiah, and we get that. But what were the rest of the people in the world doing? I mean, they were still living their lives. But this one little verse, this little phrase, this section out of all this reminds me, God was aware. He's noting them also. He knew what they were doing, their accomplishments, their good or bad. Others mattered. They were not forgotten. Hey, Dad. All right, I'm going to run out of time. Taking Joe's time here in a minute. Chapter 2, verse 3. Verse 1, here's the sons of Israel, just this listing, starting with Jacob, his 12 sons, and you're going to, as I said, this will track down all the way up to David. But verse 3, the sons of Judah are Onan, and Shelah, which three are born to him of the daughter of Shua, the Canaanitess, and the firstborn of Judah. Here's the note out of all your life, whatever you accomplished, did or didn't. He was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. You reckon he was the only bad person since creation, since man was put on the earth? Probably not. There's a time God's going to wipe out all of humanity. But in a listing of people and descendants, and just name, oops, he was a bad dude. Not just a little bad. He's bad to the point God says you need to be gone individually. And God, of course, carried that out. A son of Judah, again, you can cross-reference this. Our time's starting to run. Go back to Genesis 38. You can cross-reference. He's the husband to Tamar. Oh, maybe that name starts to click. We know a couple of stories involving Judah and Tamar after her husband's gone, and then their ongoing connection and relationships and all that. This is the guy that was husband to Tamar. Why is Tamar ended up being a widow? It said we know some stories about her. Because God had killed him. Because he was so wicked or so evil. Wicked in the Lord's sight. Is this an eternal reminder? Aware it's what the Lord sees? As he said, what's the purpose for these books? God gave us a covenant. These are the commands. He says, do them, you're blessed and you're lived, and wonderful things happen. You don't do them, and you just were carried off in exile as a nation. Individually, things can happen also. So for the Israelites reading this, there was a guy way back there. He got to the point, he was so bad, the Lord struck him dead because he was that evil, was that bad. Maybe that's a jog for them. How am I living today? How am I doing with those commandments, with that covenant of God? He doesn't deal with this only on a national level, the rise and fall of nations. He sees us individually. He knew what was doing or not doing, as the case may have been. You may have heard of this one, because I did a lesson on it about 23 years ago, for those that were present. The prayer of Jabez. Okay, maybe you don't remember my lesson. Maybe you didn't know me then. Books have been written about this. The prayer of Jabez. What a guy. We don't know a lot about him, but now we're over to chapter 4, back in 1 Chronicles. 1 Chronicles chapter 4. It's continuing, now we're into the lineage of the family of Judah, descendants of Judah, just again, one after another, bam, bam, bam. Chapter 4, verse 9, Jabez was more honorable than his brethren. And here's another name association. We're told why he's given that name. His mother called his name Jabez, saying, because I bear him with sorrow. Pain in childbirth? Do I need to ask the women to vouch for that? Or we guys been around enough, we've seen it. We don't want any part of it, but we've seen it, we understand. Maybe we all could have been named Jabez, right? But some in particular, at his birth, his mom, that's what's on her mind. This is Jabez. I bore him in sorrow. But he's an honorable guy. And verse 10, we've got even more about him. I mean, you get 2 verses of note about you in this list where it's usually just like 6, 7, 10 names within a verse, just moving, rolling on. And Jabez called on the God of Israel, saying, oh, that thou would bless me indeed, that you would enlarge my coast, that your hand would be with me, and that you would keep me from evil, that it may not grieve me. And God granted him that which he requested. Jabez, from such a list, some, nothing, we just know a name. He was a father, he was a son, But here's a guy, a man of honor, and offers this beautiful prayer that's granted by God. Do you see another thing here? As the Israelites reading this, there's some who are so evil God killed them. But you know what's possible? It's possible to keep this covenant and to call upon God. And He blesses. And He'll give you not only that prayer, but a lot of great things besides that, as He had promised, if we'll keep that covenant. Any thoughts or comments through those 6? Not asking you to memorize them, just they're people of note because God noted them. The Holy Spirit noted them in writing of these things. That's the 6 I wanted to bring out. Let me suggest there are other, just keep on reading through this section. You'll read about different craftsmen, people who are skilled individually. I mean, they could work with rock or granite or marble or wood or ivory or whatever it was. They're people of note brought out in these lists. There are those who were just serve the king in particular, different functions for the king, as we would say, servants or in his court or whatever. A listing of those brought out in these books. It tells us about a king who was captive for a time, about the descendants of Simeon. And most of a lot of these, as it starts getting, where did they settle in the land? Well, the descendants of Simeon, they had a lot of sheep. They needed land for pasture. And so that's borne out in here. If you want to keep reading and go through that section, why they lived where they did, if you're of the tribe of Simeon. There's the musicians that were appointed, first for the tabernacle, of course, the temple that would follow, and they're listed in here, and how important they were, and how they weren't given, they didn't have like a day job. That was their job. That's how important music and worship to God was. It says they weren't given anything else to do. That was their appointed service, what they did to God. They weren't the only ones singing, leading the people, but that aspect of worship. And then it talks about, again, as they've been carried off, when the remnant comes back, those who resettle the land, those who owned their own property. If you've been kicked out of a place or drug off, you would like to be able to come back and I've still got my house, or I've got the piece of property at least, or whatever it was. And so all that is listed in here. You can go on and find that. Now quickly, why do we have these notes? I've suggested 3 reasons. You may think of others. 1, the genealogical records. The literal genealogical records for the Jews, for the Israelites, so that they could trace their families, could trace their heritage. It said they've been gone for years, hauled off, somebody else has moved into the land. This is being recreated for them, or reestablished, set down. Is that going to be important for those who are the lineage would trace down to the Messiah? Yeah, that would be something. How about if you're just a descendant of Aaron, of the tribe of Levites? Remember, out of his sons, they had different orders for who did what work. Who's going to pack up the camp? Who gets to go in and haul these things from the holy place or whatever? You need to know where you belonged. Who am I? Where did I come from? Ownership of property, all these things. Secondly, a historical account. We've got stories. We've got records of what happened. Several of them, as we said, they're just noted here, but you can go back to Genesis or Deuteronomy or wherever and go, yep, same person, that's what it says about him. Verifying there the accuracy of these things. There's details, there's connections being made. And then thirdly, factual. Is it boring to sit and read through these, I can't pronounce half the names correctly, but just the sons of blah, 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 blah. You know what? They were actual people. Maybe names from a different language that, I'm not going to call my son Peleg or Mizraim or whatever, but they were actual, real people. This isn't fairy tale stuff. Things happen to them, as the Bible records. And so there's history being written down and recorded. Hopefully that would help increase our faith by seeing all of this. I'll close with this. How will you be remembered? What's going to be your legacy? The day after you died or 1,000 years after you've died? Somebody digs up, on Googles your name or goes to the cemetery or whatever and finds your tombstone. How will you be remembered in the footnotes of history? What deeds will you have accomplished? What legacy will you have left? Hopefully it's one for righteousness, not for evil. But we've seen examples on both sides of that, right? Closing statement there. Each of us has a place in history. Let's make sure of our place in eternity. Because our deeds are likewise noticed, being noted. And I put 3 verses down here, 3 references. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, remember what that talks about? We labor to serve God. Why? Verse 10, for we will all appear for the judgment seat of Christ. To give account of the things you've done in your body. Were you an Er? An Ur? Were you a Jabez? What did you do in your life? Romans 14, similar passage. Talks about us all appearing for the judgment seat, where we will give account of ourselves. Both good and bad. Is God dependent on what I say only to throw out the good? No, He's noticed. He's noted. How do we know that? The last one, Revelation 20, talking about the end of time. The books, plural, being opened for judgment. I think referring to the books of the Bible, the Scriptures. There's that covenant. There's the commands of God, what we're supposed to do. But then it says, beyond the books there was what? Another book, singular, open. And it identifies it. It is the book of life. In verse 15, those whose names were not found written in the book of life, if God hadn't noted you for doing what I said, being the kind of person I wanted you to be, keeping my covenant, your name's not in my book. And they're cast out into punishment for eternity. Any closing thoughts? Anything I've overlooked or misspoken or you gathered out of this little snippet looking into 1 Chronicles, first few chapters there?
This just shows that God knows every single person. We're not lost in the
He knows us. And by name. Yeah. Thank you very much. Have a few minutes break before service.